Training and Education in Islam by Ayatollah Murtuda Mutahhari. Chapter 18, Factors Contributing to Training, Part 3, Reflection, Love of the Awliya, Marriage, and Jihad. Our discussion was about the factors in Islamic teachings which are given emphasis in self-reformation and on the Islamic training of an individual. We have said that on account of its being a belief system and having a special appeal to man, religion has ways for human training which do not exist in non-religious schools of thought. In the last session, we discussed a subject known as self-reckoning, which is much emphasized in Islamic texts. And we observed that in Islamic texts, from the Noble Qur'an down to the sayings of the Noble Messenger and those of the Commander of the Faithful and other Imams, this subject is given considerable attention for the good of the believers and Muslims. If we refer to books on Islamic ethics, from the oldest ones up to the latest titles, we can see that the issue of vigilance and self-reckoning has been given extraordinary importance. Another subject which also has an educational dimension and is frequently included in Islamic teachings is reflection, tafakkur. In many of our written works, reflection is mentioned as a form of worship, ibadah, in various versions. That is, there are sayings which say, an hour of reflection is better than a year of worship, an hour of reflection is better than 60 years of worship, or an hour of reflection is better than 70 years of worship. Of course, there is no conflict here, as there are different levels of reflection. 3 types of worship. Therefore, reflection in itself is a form of worship, and we have 3 types of worship. Number 1, worship of the body like praying and fasting. Number 2, worship of wealth like the giving of zakat, khums, and almsgiving, infaqat, in general. And 3, mental worship, which is purely spiritual worship, which is called reflection. And reflection is the best type of worship. From the text of the tradition, an hour of reflection is better than 1 year, 60 years, or 70 years of worship. It is clear that reflection is far more valuable than other types of worship. An hour of it may be equivalent to 60 years of worship devoid of reflection. It should not be misconstrued to signify substitution or replacement of the ritual forms of worship. This is not so. Each of them is essential and necessary in its own right. This shows the necessity of reflection. Now, the question is, reflection on what? Of course, we do not limit reflection. We have different types of reflection whose salient features are also highlighted in Islamic texts. Reflection on the world of creation. 1 is reflection of the world of creation for knowing God and in reality, discovering the universe for the gnosis of Allah. We can read how often this subject is repeated in the Qur'an itself. For instance, in Surah 3, verses 190 to 191, it states, "Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the alternation of night and day, there are signs for those who possess intellects. Those who remember Allah standing, sitting, and lying on their sides, and reflect on the creation of the heavens and the earth." There is no doubt that if one reflects or ponders on the working of the universe, its systems, and the minute details of the creatures, and his intention in this reflection, pondering or discovery of the secrets of the universe, is to know better the truth in God, then this is knowledge as well as worship. This is scientific reflection as well as a form of worship. Reflection on history. Another type of reflection stressed in the Noble Qur'an itself is reflection on history, or reflection on the destiny or fate of past communities and nations. The Qur'an mentions in passing stories and accounts, which we call history, mentioning those parts with more moral lessons to learn. It also emphasizes the point that the mentioning of a story or account must not be for mere storytelling or a pastime. In Surah 7, verse 176, it states, So recount these narratives so that they may reflect. This is another type of reflection, which is also a form of worship according to Islam. Reflection on one's self. Another type of reflection, which is also a form of worship, which is our main concern in this discussion, is man's reflection on himself. That is, man himself is the subject of his reflection, and this has two kinds. There is a time when man himself as a scientific subject is the subject of his reflection. This belongs to the first kind of self-reflection. There is also a time when man reflects on his actions and works, how he decides, how he works, and how not to be easily overwhelmed by events and happenings. This is the second kind of self-reflection. Is social determinism dominant over man? There is a time when man is like a straw carried away by a flood everywhere. There is no doubt that society is also like a flood which carries individuals this or that direction, but this is not a case of absolute determinism. The environment, society, and social conditions are not dominant over man as absolute determinism. That is, it is not true that man cannot make any decision for himself given this flood current. He can change his place and even go against the current. In fact, he can go against the direction of the current which carries individuals, thereby affecting the direction of the current, and, by extension, affecting the direction of individuals. We know that Islamic teachings are based upon this view. Otherwise, any sense of responsibility, duty, enjoining what is good, forbidding what is wrong, jihad, and the like would have no meaning at all. No, even reward and punishment would rendered senseless as well. If man is supposed to be absolutely determined and compelled by society, then good or bad, reward or punishment in this world or in the hereafter would become entirely meaningless for man. The Islamic teachings are against this way of thinking. Reflection as a primary condition for mastery over one's destiny and society. In order for man to have mastery over his destiny and his society, at least to the extent that he is not totally overwhelmed by the circumstances and conditions around him, the primary condition is reflection. This moral reflection under discussion is something like self-reckoning. That is, one must allocate for himself a time every day in which he detaches himself from everything and has what is called introspection. He must reflect introspectively and think about himself, his condition, the decisions he must make, the work he must do, and the work he has done. He must assess his work in the past, the friends he associates with, the book he has read, and others. For example, you read a book and then think for a while what you learn from it, how it affects you positively or negatively. And then from there, you are more meticulous in choosing another book to read. Man does not have enough time and opportunity to read all the books in the world. Instead, he must choose which ones to read. The following is narrated saying from the commander of the faithful, which is not included in Nahjul Balagha, but recorded in the books of tradition. It can be found in Biharul Anwar, volume 1, page 219, where it states, "Lifespan is short, while knowledge is vast. So take what is good in knowledge and abandon the rest." Therefore, one must choose even when reading books. He must choose his friends and companions, and choosing without thinking is meaningless. Assess what benefits you get from companionship with your friends and companions. Are they good or bad? Think of the effects of your personal activities on you and the benefits you get from them. More important than this, whenever you want to do something, think first and then decide. This is while in most cases we do not spend enough time thinking about the decisions we make. That is, if we had thought beforehand, we would not have made the decisions we made. It means that one must think about any action he wants to do. In today's jargon, he must think of the effects and requirements of the action. What reactions will it generate? Where will it lead us? In the words of the Prophet, what is its consequence? Four-sightedness. Someone came to the noble messenger and said, "O messenger of Allah, give me a piece of advice." It is narrated that he asked this question 3 times, and then the Prophet, peace be with him, and his progeny said, "Will you act upon what I'm going to say?" He said, "Yes." The Prophet then said, and this is recorded in Biharul Anwar, volume 71, page 339, "Whenever you decide on doing something, think first of its consequence." Tadabbur. Basically, the word tadabbur, which is derived from the root word dabara, has the same meaning of four-sightedness. Tadabbur and adbar are of the same root word. Tadabbur means to see the consequence, aftermath, or result of an action, and not only to see its visage. Every action has its front and rear view. Man usually looks only at the front view of an action and not its rear view, unless he fails to do so. In that case, he looks around and looks behind. In many instances, the front view of an action looks different from its rear view. Thinking of the end result means that before doing something, one must also examine its consequence. The commander of the faithful has a saying about mischief recorded in Nahjul Balagha, Sermon 92, that mischief's visage is different from its rear view. He said, "When mischief comes, they confuse right from wrong, and when they clear away, they leave a warning." It is an amazing statement. When mischief appears, it is like dust scattered in the air or darkness in which no one can see. Lies, rumors, tensions, and intense emotions for or against him will prevail. One does not know at all how to judge for himself amidst mischief and sedition. However, as mischief disappears, it is as if darkness disappears and dusts settle down. Then, as he looks around, he sees something else. He can see what he saw in the darkness, which is different from what he can see in brightness. When they clear away, they leave a warning. The habit to reflect. As such, one of the elements of self-reformation and training in Islamic teachings is the habit to reflect. Reflection must become a habit. The habit to reflect means to seriously think about every action that a person wants to do before actually doing so. In Islamic ethics, as we have said, it is like self-reckoning. Apart from thinking prior to every decision, it is said that one must allocate a certain time, even if it consists of only a few minutes, for himself every day, and think about himself and the things he wants to do. We have also many narrations regarding thinking, tafakkur. There is the following tradition about Abu Dharr, and it is also recorded in Biharul Anwar, volume 71, page 323, that most acts of worship of Abu Dharr were reflection. It is thinking that enlightens a person, and an act of worship devoid of thinking may come out to be null and void. Mingling with the righteous. Still, another element for reformation and training which is given considerable attention is mingling with righteous and good people. In Islamic texts, we have a section or bab on companionship and its effects, be it positive or negative. Companionship with the righteous has an extraordinary effect, while companionship with the wicked has the contrary effect. This is something unavoidable. That is, no matter how much a person, so to speak, closes his heart, when he accompanies another person, he will definitely be influenced in one way or another. The Prophet of Islam, peace be with him, and his progeny said, "Man is with the religion of his friend." It implies that if you befriend a person and you become close friends, you also accept his religion. There is also this expression in Nahjul Balagha in Sermon 85 which says, "Companionship with sensual people is obliviousness of faith." If mansat is the nominative form of nisyan, then mansatun lil iman means obliviousness of faith. And if it is a name of place, as it is more often applied to in this case, then the expression is more interesting, an abode of obliviousness of faith. Imam Ali said, "Companionship with sensual people is an abode of obliviousness of faith. That is, if a person goes there, he will totally forget his faith. In one of the verses of the Qur'an in Surah Taha, apparently addressed to Prophet Musa, it is stated, "So do not let yourself be distracted from it by those who do not believe in it and who follow their desires, lest you should perish." This is found in Surah 20, verse 16. After the declaration of his prophethood, Prophet Moses, or Musa alayhi salam, was warned, "The faithless should not pose an obstruction to you." This obstruction is not a physical or actual obstruction, such that, for example, Pharaoh would not allow him by force to perform his mission, as indicated by the succeeding phrase, "and who followed their desires, lest you should perish." It can thus be deduced from this verse that Prophet Moses was given a warning. Be careful not to be influenced by the wicked people. Of course, this does not mean disregarding these people. Otherwise, who shall he invite to the truth? Instead, it means stressing the bad effect of mingling with the wicked people. Therefore, one must be selective in companionship. This moral companionship is different from the companionship of the teacher and the student, or that of the trainer and the trainee. It means close companionship. In this world, everyone has a friend with whom he mingles and associates, and one must have a friend. For this training and morality, one must also be selective in friendship and companionship. A tradition from Prophet Isa, Jesus. It is recorded in our corpus of traditions that a group of people, perhaps his disciples, asked Jesus, peace be with him, "O Spirit of Allah, with whom shall we mingle?" He replied, and this is recorded in Al-Kafi, volume 1, page 39, "Mingle with him whose sight makes you remember Allah, whose logic increases your knowledge, and whose action encourages you to do good." That is, mingle with him whose sight makes you remember God. Some people are such that seeing them makes a person forget God, while the actions, attitude, disposition, physical features, and characteristics of other people take him away from obliviousness. Mingle with him whose sight makes you remember God, and whose speech increases your knowledge. That is, all his words are new facts for you. Whatever he tells you is a new truth that you acquire from mingling with him. One can observe that after mingling with certain individuals, he can really feel that he learns something which adds to his knowledge, and his action encourages you to do good deeds. He behaves in a way that encourages you or urges you to do good deeds. We have said that companionship has an involuntary effect. I should also point out that this is different from the companionship of the teacher and the student and the like, because man has two types of companionship. In one type of companionship, so to speak, he closes the windows of his soul. He hides himself. Neither does he show himself as he is, nor is he ready to accept the other party. As you can see, when a person meets someone for the first time, he immediately adopts a superficial personality and does not show the totality of his person. However, as they get along and become close friends, they tend to open their hearts to each other. He tells everything about himself to the other person, or at least he does not hide it. The other person does the same. The companionship that is impressively influential is this close companionship, and one is unconsciously affected by it. Rumi has a very beautiful poem in this regard. He says, "It goes from breasts to breasts, through the hidden path of goodness and hatred. Good speech makes you good, wicked speech makes you wicked." When a person sits with good people, he does not realize how much good he acquires from them. So is the case when he sits with wicked people. Devotion. As far as companionship is concerned, the thing whose effect is far-reaching is the appearance of devotion. The issue of devotion and attachment to a certain person is the highest and most significant factor in the reformation of a person. If it is rightfully done, it will make a person extremely good. But if it is wrongly done, it is a blazing fire that will burn him. Devotion belongs to the category of love and infatuation. If a person acknowledges someone as a model and a man of excellence and is attracted to his character and disposition, he will be extremely influenced by him and will change accordingly. This is the reason why the mystics and Sufis give extraordinary importance to the issue of devotion to a sheikh or murshid, teacher. For the meantime, their statements are not our concern. This is basically the reason why in Islam we have many instructions regarding love of the Awliya or saints, and we say, for example, that the love of the commander of the faithful is such and such. What is it meant for? Is this not polytheism? It is polytheism if I do not mention the point I am going to say. The commander of the faithful is the noblest of people after the prophet, but we are all bound to worship God, and all prophets are means for man to reach God. Ali, who is the commander of the faithful, is a perfect man, well and good. Why we should love him then? The answer is that loving the prophet, loving the commander of the faithful, or loving any perfect man is the greatest factor for the reformation and training of man. This is the philosophy behind loving the Awliya. The love of the Awliya as described in Ziyarat Aminullah. Certainly, those present have recited Ziyarat Aminullah. Among the ziyarat we have for the Imams, it is not improbable that it is the most authentic both in terms of the chain of transmission, sanad, that is, it has a definite chain of transmission that reaches up to the Imams, and it is not something which can only be found in a single book, and also of content. For this reason, it is one of the most sublime ziyarats, or perhaps the most sublime ziyara. It is a short ziyara. In Mafatih al-Jinan and other books, it is recorded as one of the ziyarat of the commander of the faithful, and one of the absolute ziyarat. It means that it is ziyara not specific to a certain day or days. One can pay homage or ziyara to the commander of the faithful by reciting it, and it is not even limited to the commander of the faithful. That is, one can pay homage to any imam with this ziyara by changing the phrase Assalamu alayka ya Amir al-Mu'mineen to the appropriate one. It is followed by short lines of salutations and expressions of devotion to the imam and testimony. I bear witness that you have exerted the due and essential efforts in the way of Allah. In some, I bear witness that you have performed the duty you ought to perform. It has 13 lines which are all supplications. That is, after paying homage to the Imam, we ask all those things from God, the Exalted, in the presence of the Imam. My evidence is 2 lines from it. We read, "Let me be happy and satisfied with that which you consider good for me. Let me agree with that which you decide for me. Let me passionately remember you and invoke you. Let me be in love with your pure and sincere friends, O God. Let me be well liked and respected on the earth and in the heavens. Let me be unruffled and well composed in the midst of misfortunes. Let me be gratefully thankful in prosperity. Let me be mindful of much and more bounties. Let me be ardently desireful for the heart-warming meeting with you, well equipped with piety to gain my end on the day of requital. Let me follow into the footsteps of your representatives. Let me disassociate myself from the mannerisms of your enemies. Let me pass my time in this world by praising and glorifying you." Included in the 13 lines are these 2 sentences about love. O God, I want to be both the lover and the beloved, but whom should I love? Let me be in love with your pure and sincere friends. Loving the Awliya is like a magnet. This is different from reflection and self-reckoning. The latter are mental works which are also essential, but the effect of loving the Awliya is much more profound. In the book, Polarization Around the Character of Ali ibn Abi Talib, in which I have an extensive discussion on this subject, I have mentioned the example of iron fillings spread on the ground. There is a time when we want to manually gather them one by one. There is also a time when we want to gather them by using a strong magnet to pull them together. If a person wants by relying only on reflection, reminding, self-reckoning, vigilance, and likes to remove bad traits one at a time from himself and reform himself, of course it is possible, but it is like the one who wants to gather iron fillings manually. But if a person succeeds in finding a perfect man to whom he is attracted, he can see that he will succeed in only a day in doing a work which would have taken many years. Let me be in love with your pure and sincere friends, and let me be well liked and respected on the earth and in the heavens. The blamer's modus operandi. It is not part of purity and God-wariness for me to be such that people are hostile to me. This was the modus operandi of the blamers from among the Sufis. One Sufi sect was known as Malamatiyya. The way they adopted as what they brought to be jihad against the self was to do something for which people would hate them and have a bad opinion of them. For example, one of them was not a drunkard, but he would pretend to be a drunkard by carrying a bottle of wine wherever he would go. Or he was an observant of ritual prayers, but he would pray whenever no one could see, so that people would say that he was not praying. The story of Adib Nayshaburi. In Mashhad, there was someone named Adib Nayshaburi. After him, there was another person named Adib number 2, who is still alive. I have seen the latter a lot, and he is a really good person. That is, he has a lot of good traits, and he is a man of faith. But these two Adibs had a move against the hypocrites. That is, they used to do certain things against the hypocrites. Hypocrites would pretend to be engaging in worship, whereas they were not. These two Adibs were doing the opposite. They would pretend that they were not engaging in worship, where in fact they would engage in worship. For example, they could hardly be seen performing pilgrimage to the shrine of Imam Rida in Mashhad, but they were also seen doing it. Of course, this is also a bit of pretentious reaction to the pretenders. Poets like Hafiz also make mention of Rindi and Qallashi, roguery. It is the same pretension as opposed to the pretension of the hypocrites. The Adib's approach was exactly this one, but it is still a kind of pretension. One of the students of the late Adib I, who was also a pious man of letters, and became a prominent teacher of the Ministry of Education, narrated, "I was once rendering a service at the Holy Shrine while I was a student of Adib. I was a student who was always with him. I would even do his work. I would prepare his cup of tea and roll his cigarettes. At dawn, I once came to the courtyard of the shrine and was busy sweeping the floor. I saw the master removing his turban from his head so that no one could recognize him. As he came out of the courtyard's gate, I noticed him. From his stature and pace of walking amidst darkness, I sensed that it was no other than the master. I was wondering where he wanted to go at the time of night. He was in a hurry while holding his staff. In the jargon of the Khorasanis, he used to walk like a raven, but this time he was walking fast without using his staff. I saw him going to an old courtyard. As he reached a window, he fell down right there in a state of prostration. He was in that state for some time. Then he took away his staff twice, put his turban on his head while no one appeared to be observing him, and went away." They were such people. Human dignity as sacred. These are not consistent with the Islamic standard. How should man be like that? It is stated in a tradition that anyone who has authority over something has no authority over his dignity. No one has the right to lower his dignity in front of people, saying, "It is mine. I want to trample upon my honor. It is not your business." This is not allowed, especially if it concerns the honor and dignity of the religion. Basically, every Muslim is an asset of Islam. If Mr. Zaid is really a Muslim, he must let society understand and recognize him. Of course, it must be solely for the sake of Allah and not for mere show. To show his Muslimness for the sake of God means to show what he really believes in and practices. It must be shown so that society would know that such a person has such a thing. It is senseless for people to be Muslims while the society is not aware that they are Muslims and must be treated as such. Later, the youth would come, make judgment according to what is apparent, and deny that those individuals are Muslims. This should not be the case. Let me be well liked and respected on the earth and in the heavens. That is, let me be respected by the people on the earth as well as in heaven. If a person is respected on the earth but cursed in heaven, it is something undesirable, as will be the fate of the pretenders. May I be with the truth, so that you would love me and the people would know and love me. Another factor that contributes to reform and training is jihad, and in general, it includes hardships and afflictions, both the involuntary, in which the voluntary dimensions is in the form of man's reaction to those hardships, and the voluntary, for being a product of man's own making. Man is a wonderful being. It is wrong to think that there is only one factor in the world for the reformation of man. Man has different dimensions. Every dimension has its own element for reform. For example, loving the Awliya is a very interesting element, but can it replace all other elements? There is a kind of immaturity or childishness in man which cannot be turned into maturity by this element, as it needs a different one. The role of marriage in training and upbringing. For instance, why is marriage considered a sacred affair and an act of worship in Islam, although it is related to physical pleasures and carnal desires? One of the reasons is that marriage is the first step of man from self-centeredness to the love of others. Prior to marriage, only I existed and everything was for me. The first step in breaking this cell in which another being is placed beside this I and acquires meaning by working for her, enduring trouble for her, and serving her and not me is in marriage. As she begets children, the she becomes they. Sometimes this they becomes so many that the I is naturally forgotten in the process and everything becomes her and theirs. These are the initial steps of man's exit from the state of I-ness and egotism toward love of others, in which she and they are the focus of attention. Experience shows that regarding chaste, unmarried individuals who did not marry at all under the excuse of having a better opportunity to reform themselves, firstly, most of them regretted it in the end, saying to others, "We did not marry, so do not do it." Secondly, although these chaste, unmarried individuals were really ulama, mujtahids in jurisprudence and its principles, philosophers and mystics, until the end, say at the age of 80, they would still manifest a state of immaturity and childishness. For instance, a certain state of frivolity which can be seen in a typical youth can be seen in a person who's in his 80s. This shows that there is a sort of maturity which cannot be seen except in marriage and formation of family. It cannot be found in a school. It cannot be found in the jihad against the self. It cannot be found through the supererogatory night prayers. It cannot be found by means of devotion to the righteous people. It must be acquired only here, in marriage. As such, a priest or a cardinal can never turn into a perfect man, granted that he is really truthful to his celibacy vow. Hasur means literally one who is under restriction. I do not know there are two prophets called Hasur by the Qur'an who are not said to have had any physical or sexual defect or any other defect. Some categorically say that in many aspects the Holy Christ is far superior to many prophets in spite of this lack in him, as well as in Prophet Yahya or John the Baptist. That is, Jesus is different from a prophet who possesses his merits and does not have the lack. That prophet would be more perfect than him. Formation of a family, which is in itself a moral element, and this is one of the reasons behind the sanctity of marriage in Islam, is an irreplaceable element. Jihad as an agent of reform and training. Jihad is another element which is irreplaceable. That is, it is impossible for a faithful Muslim who experienced jihad and a faithful Muslim who has no experience of jihad to have the same morale. One is placed in a situation which we are not in, and we do not know what will happen if we are in such a situation, in which he faces another person in a combat. He must decide in a moment. His faith is so firm and established that at that moment he is on the verge of death, on account of his religion and faith. That which can be done here cannot be done elsewhere. In this regard, there is a tradition of the Holy Prophet, which is really amazing. He says in Sunan Abu Dawood, in section Jihad, page 693, Hadith number 2496, "He who dies without having fought or having felt fighting against the infidels to be his duty will die guilty of a kind of hypocrisy." Of course, this is a kind of an unconscious hypocrisy without a person knowing it, though still a hypocrisy. The story of the ascetic man and jihad. Rumi narrated an interesting and excellent story in Masnavi and Ma'navi. According to him, there was an ascetic man who was meticulous, pious, and devoted. He performed both the obligatory and optional acts of worship. One day he realized that he had already performed all acts of worship except jihad in the way of God, and as he would die soon, he must also get its reward. He said to a soldier, "I am still deprived of the reward of jihad. Is it possible for you to inform me whenever there is a call for jihad, so that I can participate and thereby earn its reward?" The soldier said that there was no reason why he would not inform him. One day, the soldier told the ascetic man to prepare as the infidels launched an attack invading Muslim territory, capturing Muslim women and killing the Muslim men. The ascetic man also picked up his weapons, mounted his horse, brandished his sword, and joined the Muslim army. One day, while the Muslim army encamped for a rest, there was a sudden public announcement that the enemy had come and everybody must move. The trained soldiers quickly put on their swords and weapons, mounted their horses, and fiercely rushed into the enemy ranks. Before this ascetic man, who would spend half an hour performing his ablution and an hour making a ritual bath, could run and find his sword, his riding boots or horse, and in some, before he could prepare himself, the others had already gone, fought, slayed, were slain, captured enemies, and come back. This poor fellow was very sad, saying, "How quick was it! I am still deprived of the reward of jihad. This is something very bad. I missed my opportunity to perform jihad." A bound but robust man from among the captives was shown to him. He was told, "Can you see this man? He killed so many innocent Muslims. We have captured him, and there is no way except to execute him. Now, we hand him over to you. Bring him somewhere to execute him so that you can attain the reward of participating in jihad." They handed the prisoner over to him and also gave him a sword. He brought the prisoner away to execute him. After some time, there was no news about the ascetic man. They said, "Executing a prisoner should not take much time. Let us go and see why he has not come back." They found out that the ascetic man had fallen down unconsciously, and the wretched man who was bound had also jumped on top of him to strangle his would-be executioner. The captive was about to succeed when they came and slew him. They brought the ascetic man to a tent and woke him up, saying, "What happened?" He said, "By God, I do not know. While bringing him away, I asked him, 'O cursed one, for what reason did you kill so many Muslims?' He shouted at the top of his voice, and I cannot remember the rest." A person who has not fought in a battle, even if he has performed all acts of worship in the world, will become unconscious by just hearing "get away" and fall. This is the meaning of the tradition, "He who dies without having fought or having felt fighting against the infidels to be his duty will die guilty of a kind of hypocrisy." The Prophet considered fighting in the sense of jihad as an agent of moral reform and refinement of the self. Without it, there is a kind of hypocrisy in man's soul. Questions and answers. Question number 1. Is to think of a sin or not? As far as I have heard, it is said that to think of a sin, so long as it is not put into action, is not a sin. We asked one of the fuqaha or jurists about designing a cinema. If a religious Muslim is asked to design a cinema or something related to a cinema, does he commit a sin, if he does it or not? Is the money he will earn from it lawful or not? In his reply to us, he said that there is no problem in doing so whether the cinema is bad or good. considered the cinema as cinema of the day and not cinema as an academic forum. His argument was that designing it is a sinful idea, and so long as its foundations have not yet been established, it has no permit yet to operate. The laborers to construct it are yet to be fixed, and the required volume of cement to construct it is yet to be purchased. No sin has been committed yet. The other question is this: is to think of a rewarding act worthy of a spiritual reward or not? That is, you are still thinking of a rewarding act and have not yet put it into action, and sometimes there is an impediment to its realization. For example, you sit down and think that it is good to do or give such and such amount in such and such place as assistance, and later you cannot do so. Is it worthy of spiritual reward to that extent? Answer by Ayatollah Murtuda Mutahhari. Well, I do not exactly know what the gentleman who posed this question really meant. At any rate, the subject must be elaborated on. For example, there is a time when, God forbid, you yourself want to put a cinema, just like he has said. So long as it is at the stage of thinking or design, and this idea not yet put into action by you, this is not a sin for you. That is, if you decide to commit a sin, and you provide all its preliminaries, but at the last moment you regret it or external impediments prevent you from doing it, this will not be recorded as a sin for you. This is correct. But in this case that you have mentioned, someone else wants to put up a cinema, and then you extend help in planning it, and this work of yours paves the way for him to do it. This is called assistance to sin in relation to him. Thus the case in which you design the cinema on your own, and later you do not pursue it, or you design a cinema for someone else who also does not pursue it in the end, is different from the case in which you help him in designing it and he uses your design and puts it into action. This is a sin in itself because it involves assisting another person in committing a sin. This is like extending help in oppression. Why is it unlawful to assist in oppression? Why does even the one who puts a flake of cotton and silk in an oppressor's inkpot also commit a sin? Because it is also assistance to the oppressor. It is a form of reinforcement and assistance to him in committing a sin. Therefore, the two cases are different from each other. Meanwhile, there is no problem to merely make a plan in the sense that there is a difference between a good and a bad deed. If a person decides to do something good but does not succeed in doing it, a spiritual reward shall be written for him. This is a divine favor. You decide to do a good deed, and when you are about to do it, something hinders you from doing it. Here, a reward shall be recorded for you. But if you decide to do something bad and you fail to do so, no sin shall be recorded for you, and here it is a sort of amnesty. That we say that thinking of a sin is not a sin means that thinking of any sin is not a sin per se. For example, there is a punishment for a drunkard in this world, as well as chastisement in the hereafter. The question is this: if someone decided, God forbid, to drink wine, but later there was something that prevented him from doing it, say a strong wind came and the bottle of wine fell and was broken, can we punish him with lashes or not? One may possibly tell him, you decided to do so. You also provided all the preliminary things, and if there were no strong wind and the bottle were not broken, you would have definitely drunk wine. So there is no difference in your view, and we can punish you with 70 lashes. From the perspective of this world, this is not so, because it does not or did not materialize. From the perspective of the hereafter, there is a punishment for drinking an intoxicant. Will this person incur the punishment for a drunkard or not? In the case of good deeds, however, if a person intends to do a good deed, even without actually doing it, there is a promise of reward for him on the day of judgment. This is a divine favor. There is no dispute that a bad intention is bad in itself. There is no doubt that a bad intention is bad in itself, apart from the fact that it is a bad intention, which draws man toward evil, because every action is first entertained in the mind and then put into action. It is recorded in our traditions that Jesus, the Son of Mary, peace be with him, said, O people, you are told not to commit sin. I say unto you, do not even entertain sin in your mind. From the Islamic point of view, there is no doubt that any idea which prevents a person from remembering God is bad, let alone an idea to commit a sin. Hence, there are two questions involved here. Is to think of a sin something bad or not? Is to think of sin, even if it is not committed, a sin in itself? We have said that it is not so, but in thinking of something good is something else. It is said that if a person decides to do a good deed, but later on he fails to actually do it, as he is prevented from doing it, God the Exalted will treat him as if he is a doer of good deeds. We have many citations in this regard. It is recorded in Nahjul Balagha in Sermon 12 that as the commander of the faithful was returning from the battle of Jamal, someone asked him, "I wish my brother so-and-so had been present and he too would have seen what success and victory God has given you." The Imam, peace be with him, asked, "Did your brother hold me as a friend?" The man said yes. Then the Imam said, "In that case, he was with us." Rather, in this army of ours, even those people are also present who are still in the loins of men and the wombs of women. Shortly, time will bring them out and faith will strengthen through them. That is, it refers to people who will come, say, 1,000 years later or after, yet their hearts are with us, and if they were really present, they would have joined us. There is a false claim in our address to the leader of the martyrs, Imam Hussein. In the ziyarah, we say how we wish we were with you so as to attain such great success. But if this how we wish is true and not mere lip service or a habit, it surely will have the reward of jihad. You have heard about the story of the coming of Jabir to Karbala and the first paying of homage or ziyarah 40 days after. This is called Arba'in. Jabir was blind then. His companion, who was also a traditionist or muhaddith, narrated that while addressing the martyrs, Jabir said, "But we have been with you. We are one with you." His companion, who was Atiyah, asked Jabir, "Are we one with them? Their bodies were mutilated and cut into pieces here. You and I were not here. How come we are one with them?" Jabir said, "By God, we have been here because if I were here, I would definitely have been with them. There is no doubt that my spirit is with them." Therefore, speaking of spiritual reward and recompense, if a person really intends to do a good deed, and then there is an external and involuntary impediment along his way, God will give him the reward of the act as a favor. But regarding sin, if there is an external impediment to the commission of a sinful act, the sin for doing so shall not be recorded. Yet, merely to think of sin is obviously bad and is sort of like a sin. End of chapter 18.